Well, greetings everyone, and welcome to another episode of Healing Ties, featured on the Whole Care Network and on UK Health Radio, the world's #1 talk health radio. I'm your host and presenter, Christopher McClellan. You just might know me as the Bowtie Guy. On today's episode, we are celebrating Pride with a very special conversation with Amy Whalen, who is a staff attorney at the National Center for Lesbian Rights. As a senior staff attorney since 2011, Amy has worked on NCLR's full range of litigation, policy, and public education works, and knows firsthand that LGBTQ seniors are amongst the most important and rapidly growing segment of our community worldwide. Understanding LGBTQ history can help us be better caretakers and advocates for LGBT older adults. Let's join my conversation with Amy, and I'm wishing you a happy Pride 2021. Well, greetings, Amy, and welcome to this episode of Healing Ties. It's great to visit with you.
Hi, Chris. Thank you so much for having me and for having this chat again.
Again, we were on a podcast kind of together a couple of months ago when I'm 64. Of course, I am 64, so that I thought it was all about me. But and I was just taken back by your appearance on the podcast and reached out to you. And now we're going to do a podcast on our own. That's see the marvels of modern technology.
I know. First, we had a lovely conversation just on the phone, and now we get to do this, and other people can listen in too.
Sure, and hopeful. And I know this won't be our last conversation, but to get the conversation started, as I do with all my guests. So, Amy, tell me, how are you creating Healing Ties?
I hope I'm creating healing ties. It's a struggle that I have every day of thinking about how can I do a better job. Well, let me introduce myself as a way to answer that. My name is Amy Whalen, and I'm a senior staff attorney at the National Center for Lesbian Rights. We are based in San Francisco, but we also have staff in Washington, D.C., and we work in every state around the country as needed. But one thing that we do is we also focus on LGBTQ elders at NCLR, and we do lawsuits on behalf of LGBTQ elders, and hopefully we'll have a chance to talk about that in some more detail. And we put out, resources for people about estate planning or other protections people should have in place. We do public education. I've done trainings for caregivers and for the Alzheimer's Association and for along with SAGE, which hopefully some of your listeners know about as well, which is a great resource for LGBTQ elders as well. And so those are some of the things I do to create healing ties in our country and hopefully, for people living everywhere around these. Yeah,
because it is a universal issue. It's just not caregiving is a universal issue. It's not just a local issue, and the specific needs for LGBT seniors and caregivers are unique and real.
Yeah, very real. I was just thinking about this earlier today. I was thinking about when NCLR started. We started in the 1970s. And at that time, the issues that were in the forefront for our organization were that women who came out as gay were losing their children from previous relationships. Right. And so we were representing them and litigating those cases for them. And they were also having employment struggles and other discrimination struggles. And I was thinking about how those women are now part of our LGBTQ elder community that are coming, back, hopefully not having issues, but those are the women now who are part of the baby boomer generation who are, encountering other forms of discrimination, but who at that time, that was sort of their main issue. And I've been thinking about the ways in which NCLR has evolved over the years and continue to focus on those same folks with our organization.
It's kind of like the Stonewall age. It's those groups that really drove a path for all of us today that are in their, oh goodness, they'd be in their a lot of those folks would be in their late 70s or 80s. And now they're, in many cases, they have to rely on systems that they were protesting against back in the 60s. It's quite the phenomenon.
It really is. And I think it's really important to understand that history when you're working with people. You know, it's one thing to talk to somebody who didn't grow up in that generation and say, oh, well, right. You know, there are all these governmental resources available for you, or, you know, or, oh, these people can come into your home and take care of you. It's one thing to say that, you know, to younger people. And it's a very different thing to say that to LGBTQ elders who grew up in a time when they could lose their job. They were, you know, subjected to violence when their government, you know, turned their back on them during the AIDS crisis, when they were sometimes involuntarily committed into hospitals, you know, to cure away the gay. So I think that it's really important as advocates and people working for LGBTQ elders to understand that history and to understand the ways in which it might, they might just think differently about the world than other people do. And they might have hesitancies that other people don't for very good reason. It's
all comes out of our personal experience. And you think about, I'm 64, so I'm kind of on the cusp of that. I can't do the math that quickly when Stonewall and how old I was, but when you think about the era, there was no Will and Grace on TV at that time to kind of introduce a good role model. There were no, you know, the role models were just not there as they are today, and that's why it's important for us to be able to share the story so that folks understand the era that LGBT seniors are coming from.
Yeah, I think that's really true. I mean, it wasn't until Harvey Milk that there was an out gay politician in this country. And so, and then, you know, he, of course, was then murdered shortly after he was elected. And so, you know, I think that understanding that history of violence, understanding, you know, the generation of, you know, gay men largely that was lost through the AIDS crisis. It's all really important history for us to understand as we navigate these issues and, you know, try to understand the experiences of LGBTQ elders.
And that's kind of in my passion since as we connected on when I'm 64 podcast and sharing our story, our caregiving story, and you know, fortunate to have such a story like that, and even more fortunate to talk to people like yourself who are making a difference in the community and seeing what the needs are for not only the seniors in and of themselves, but the community as a whole. And I'd really like to kind of dig in on some of these common aspects that we think about as caregivers, accessing medical services, records, not being assured that you can receive the attention, the medical care that you need. And you know, now with marriage equality, while that's somewhat changed the playing field, there's still some things that have to be done on our end to ensure that our rights are what's the word I'm looking for? That our rights are secured.
Yeah, it's a constant thought I have as a lawyer, only because, sadly, a lot of the a lot of the examples of things that happen that I see occur during people's most vulnerable times.
Right.
Either they are experiencing a health crisis, or their loved one is experiencing a health crisis, or they've been discriminated against and lost their job, which is their source of income, and or they've their partner is ill and long lost family members have swooped in and suddenly are interfering with the visitation in the hospital, or
Right.
even with decision making issues. And so, I think that it's really important for people to understand now with marriage equality, yes, marriage is one way that you can protect some of these issues as you move forward. And as we're all eventually going to have health crises. We're all eventually going to need help, either in our home or maybe in a long-term care facility or in some other setting. And so, what are the things and steps that people can do to protect themselves? Certainly one thing, like I said, is getting married, but that's not the answer for everyone for a variety of personal reasons.
Exactly.
Some people just don't want to get married. Some people, it may not be financially the right decision for them. And so, one thing that NCLR did during the COVID crisis, which of course we're still in, but what we did at the beginning is we put out a little frequently asked questions document for LGBTQ people and their families, just because, with something like a pandemic, these issues of sickness and illness and, having a disability were in the forefront of a lot of our minds in a way that maybe we sort of forget about on a day-to-day basis. And so we put out this FAQ. It's available on our website, and it covers some of these issues. And I won't, go into the gory details of them, but there's a variety of legal documents that you can put in place that can help you or your partner if you are sick or if that person is sick. And we really encourage people to execute those. Some of them you can just do on your own. You can find the forms online, although we always encourage people to, if they have the means, to contact an attorney to make sure all of these documents are in place, especially because, rules vary from state to state in terms of what makes a valid will, for instance, or what other things are needed in order to have legally binding documents that give somebody else, for instance, decision-making power if you become ill or if you're unable to make those decisions for some period of time.
And all too often we hear the story about couples, our caregiver and their care partner, I'll use the generic term, where these documents aren't in place, and then there's an emergency, and you're scrambling to do some of this important work at a time where you're in an emotional state. And what happens when you're in an emotional state? You usually end up making some really poor decisions.
Yeah, that's right. I think that, sometimes it's hard to think about these issues. Nobody wants to think about, your own mortality or the mortality of your loved ones. It can be a hard process to think about that. It's easier on a day-to-day basis sometimes to avoid those things.
I'll do it. I'll do that tomorrow.
I'll do that tomorrow.
It'll be okay. I'll wait. Tomorrow's fine.
Yeah. And that's part of human nature.
Sure.
Of course, we all do that. It makes total sense. But hopefully, at some point people do check that off. Pride Month would be a good time. It's a time of celebration.
It's a time of celebration. Mm-hmm.
It's a time of celebration. But maybe it's also a time when you can check off these things that have been on your to-do list for months or maybe years of, I'm going to finally do my medical proxy, and I'm going to finally do this will. And, once you have it done, you can breathe easy and not talk
You
about
can
it for a while.
toast, and you can,
you can
do
toast,
a
you
little
can
dance and say, I've got that taken care of. And I think that's, that's important. It's kind of why we have these conversations and try to be lighthearted around a very difficult subject, because it's not something we all like to talk about, but it's something that we have to talk about.
I agree. You know what? I feel like there's so many creative ways that we could do this. We could, now that COVID is waning and the vaccine is here, we could have parties where we all come over to each other's house and we have these forms ready.
I'm in. I'll bring my green folder.
Exactly. Your green folder. You should talk about that a little bit.
Well, yeah. And that was one of the things that, there was many things that why we ended up connecting. But when I told the story, and all my listeners have heard this before, I'm sure, but but the green folder was something that I carried around with me wherever Richard and I went, and that had our advance directives, power of attorneys, because while we had excellent relationships with all the physicians that we dealt with, in a time in an emergency, you might end up dealing with somebody who you've not had a previous relationship with, somebody like in a physician or a nurse in a emergency room, when they ask you, like they did to me, who are you and why are you here? And it's one thing to be able to say, well, I'm his caregiver and his partner, mindful that at this time marriage equality had not been in effect. But it's another thing to be able to pull out your papers and show it to them, because that puts them on notice that, yes, you do have the authority to speak on this person's behalf. And we were fortunate that we were able to have those conversations, Richard and I. And that's why, as I continue on as an advocate and talking to professionals like you, it's just important to share these stories that, yeah, it is hard, but you can do it.
Yeah. And, sometimes it's overt hostility that LGBTQ people encounter. They're either based on, purported religious beliefs or just, lack of experience or, overt hostility. But sometimes it's also just lack of experience or, coming up against the things that these folks are used to seeing. So it's really important to have these documents in place and to, have the language ready to talk about your relationship when you're in these settings, because sometimes it's just that, these staff members see another man, like maybe they did with you and Richard, and they immediately have a belief that forms in their head about who you might be. Right. And it's not, and that, is maybe a family member, maybe a brother, maybe a hired caretaker, right? Maybe a friend. But what they don't usually think is, oh, this is this person's lifelong partner. Right. And so it's just important to have, like you said, the documents in place, and also just be really clear about the relationship from the beginning. I think what you said is really right, that you establish relationships with people who are the regular caretakers, but those might not be the only people you encounter. And so it's important to cross all your T's and dot all your I's and just make sure that, whatever documents you also need are in place and can be shown to them immediately.
Because there's one thing that's consistent across the board for every caregiving experience is there are emergencies. And you do end up interacting with people in a variety of professions, whether it's medical or legal or social workers, that you may not have a previous relationship. And those documents, those papers, as stressful as they can be putting them together, they really do help take the edge off of a very stressful situation that you're in the middle of when somebody doesn't understand who you really are.
That's a great way to talk about it. I mean, it's already a stressful situation. It's already full of, problems and issues and decisions that you need to make that are related to the health of what's happening, or, decisions to be made. And the thing that you don't want to have to also be doing is explaining that you have a right to make those decisions, or fighting for that right, or, trying to justify some relationship that somebody, is suspicious about. If, to the extent that you can just clear that away so that you can focus on the emergency at hand, I think that's... And
first focus on the emergency and the advocacy that you're there for your partner, your care partner. It was easy for us to have these conversations, but I do know how hard it is for so many couples to do so.
Yeah, and I think, it's especially important. Many people have amazing, supportive, great family members as well, who who might come in like sisters or siblings or even parents who are very supportive of their kids and would never even, think of intruding on the relationship that their son or daughter has. But unfortunately, that's not always the case. And so if you have family members who are hostile to your relationship or who haven't been accepting, and they're out there, I think that these documents are especially important, because there are so many times that we have seen at NCLR circumstances where a family member swoops in who otherwise hasn't even been involved in the lives of a couple.
Right.
And they swoop in when these things happen, either because they think there may be, money available or property available, and they swoop in and they try to take over. And those are the most heartbreaking, awful situations to encounter and to witness, is when that happens.
And it's real. These things do happen. We both have numerous stories that we could share, but I have a line that I like to use when this comes up, and I'll get your feedback on it. Where there's a will, there's a relative.
I love it.
I could say that as a non-attorney, but when there's a will, where there's a will, there's a relative, and that, again, sharing the stories. I could probably call 5 people right now, right off the top of my head, who's had that experience where their partner of 25, 30 years has passed away, and they had not done their due diligence for whatever reason.
Well, no, and I'll just add to your saying, which I think is hilarious, but when there isn't a will, you're in even bigger trouble, because when there isn't a will, then property flows to relatives, blood relatives. Mm-hmm. And so if you don't have a will and you're not married, then your property will go to one of your blood relatives who is still living. And so in order to protect against that, if that's not how you want it to work, it's very important to have a will.
So I want to see if I can impress you with this word here. If I think I have the right word, if not, then then you'll correct. Intestate.
Intestate.
How did I do? Yeah, that's when you die without a will. So
it sounds like
sounds like it.
There's so many legal terms that seem like double entendres, and that's one of them.
That's one of them. It's like, what are you talking about? My intestines? What are you talking? It's like...
There was one in law school. This doesn't exist anymore because everything is electronic, but we used to call them pocket parts. They were these like inserts that were put in the back of a book because they were updates. Pocket parts also sounds like a...
I think I could find a reason to use that one down the road somewhere. Goodness. But another area that we really haven't touched on that's equally as important And I'm seeing that, especially here in Florida, a couple of communities who 20 years ago, a couple of senior living communities who 20 years ago would not have thought about marketing to LGBT seniors. Now, all of a sudden, it's I better be diplomatic when I say this. It's the rage to have LGBT seniors in your senior living center.
Oh, wow. That's great. I mean, I have to say it's great. That seems great to me.
Seems great to me, but again, it's another example of ensuring that you have all your documents in place.
Yeah, I do think that, it depends on how you see progress, right? I mean, obviously they're seeing a market for that.
We're seeing
for that community.
Right. Mm-hmm.
They're seeing a market for that community, which is good. But let's hope that that they're backing up their word for how they will support that community if they actually come into their facility, and that means that they are trained about LGBTQ issues, that they train their staff, that they have non-discrimination policies, that they're ready to deal with issues of harassment by either staff or other people who live there. So let's hope that in marketing to that group, they've done their research and they've done their due diligence to make sure that they're actually prepared to have that population living in the facility or being in that community. And
those are important questions for LGBTQ seniors to be asking the senior living communities as they are being courted to come in. Do you have training in place? How am I welcome? Will I feel welcomed here? It's one thing to look at it on the marketing side, but it's a whole other thing to look at it on the programmatic side and knowing that you're going to be entrusting this community to your care for in most cases for the rest of their lives.
Yeah. And do you have staff who are LGBTQ? I mean, there are lots of questions I would want to know to ensure that I'm not just a paycheck for this community, and that I truly am welcome, and I will be a respected, cared for, celebrated part of this community.
There was a movie, I guess that movie is now, it's got to be over 10 years, and you may be familiar with it, but I'm not going to put you on the spot if you're not. Jen Silent, Stu Maddox, who... I kind of thought you would be. But he told the story of LGBT seniors who felt like they had to go back into the closet in communities because they were in fear of being found out, in fear of being discriminated against, and those. We just think back 10 or so years and how much things have changed since then with marriage equality. But that doesn't, and I use this very kindly, but that doesn't often take away, even though the changes are there, that doesn't often take away personal bigotry.
That is really true. Yeah, well, let me just also do a plug for Jen Silent, because it is a great...
It's a timeless film.
It's timeless, and I actually used the trailer for it, which is just this little 3 or 4 minute trailer in a training that I do with our summer law clerks who come into NCLR. I do a little training about LGBTQ elder issues, and I use that trailer just to kind of introduce these concepts that are part of that experience. But yeah, I think... it's heartbreaking to think about that piece of it that you just mentioned, that people might decide to go back in the closet when they enter these facilities because they're so unwelcoming. But that is true. It happens all the time. But, when you said that about Florida institutions now catering and marketing to LGBTQ elders, my first reaction really was, well, that's great. Yeah. I mean, that is progress. I
think it's fantastic.
I mean, because we're just coming off of a lawsuit that was resolved late last year, where we represented a lesbian couple in Missouri who applied to live in this assisted living community. They put their house up for sale. They put a down payment down, and they were, set to be placed into a unit. And the director of admissions called one of the women one day and said to her, "What is it exactly that your relationship is?" And she said, "Well, we've been married for years." And the woman said, "I'm going to have to call you back." And she did call her back. And it turned out that they had just been assuming that these two women were sisters, applying for admission into this living facility, and they rejected them. And even though this facility was not religiously affiliated, it didn't preference any people of a certain religion, they told them that they would only allow married couples into the facility according to the quote unquote biblical definition of marriage. And that just happened. We just resolved that case late last year. So it's not hypothetical. This really does happen.
Being from St. Louis, as I am, and connected to the community there, I remember that one for sure. Goodness. But it just kind of proves the point that, we have all these rights per se that granted under marriage, but doesn't take away personal bigotry.
It doesn't. And that's always been true. And as a lawyer, it's like, it's always a constantly humbling experience, because, what we fight for are laws that are fair and just, and then we enforce those laws for our clients. But the truth is that the real change in the LGBTQ civil rights movement came because of, people being brave and coming out and telling their stories and being truthful about who they are. It's always helpful to have laws in place. Of course, that's essential to any kind of social protection. It's essential to have laws in place and to have enforcement of those laws. But also what you need is, people's hearts and minds to change. And that didn't happen. I will always say that the great progress in the LGBTQ civil rights movement really did come because people were brave enough to come out and tell their stories. And that's true for gay people, and that's true especially for transgender people. So the more and more that people do that and feel safe to do that, I think the more progress comes.
That's why one of my pet comments, or mottos, is it's through story sharing where diversity meets the road to collaborate on a common cause. And when you think about caregiving and caregiver stories, and one of the reasons why our story was so successful was because it just happened to be about two men. People were able to put themselves in our position. And because when it got right down to it, we just want to peacefully love and care for the one that's entrusted in our care. We don't want to have to deal with the minutia when you're at your final stages with somebody. And that's another part about this whole marriage equality component that is often left unsaid is, the rights granted upon marriage lead up to death as well. And one of the other issues that we faced, even though all our paperwork was in place, at the time Richard made his life transition, when I got the call saying, well, you're going to have to make other arrangements for his cremains, because you're not the next of kin. We can't speak to you. Well, now wait a minute. All those documents were in place before. Now it's an issue. if we were married, that would not
really
have been
true.
an issue. But
it's really true. I mean, like I said, people have very specific personal reasons, maybe not to choose marriage, or some couples, have been together for so long, and it's just not something that they choose to do this late in life. But there is no denying the fact that if you are married, you instantly have a ton of legal protections that you don't otherwise have. And so there are ways around that. You can take care of those issues through legal documents, of course, as well. But it's an easy way to ensure that you have many rights related to your long-term partner that are just instantly granted upon that marriage. So, it is a simple way.
It does.
I mean, some people choose it, not because they believe in marriage as some, romantic concept, but because of this issue, because it provides these protections. I mean, I myself, I didn't really think about marrying my wife until we had a kid, because it just wasn't important to me. I didn't feel like I needed marriage, I thought that our relationship was amazing, and we both didn't feel that we needed that. But then we had a kid, and it, was this really easy way to provide protection for her too. And so we took that step, personally, and it actually surprised me. It ended up being quite meaningful when we did it. And we both cried when it happened, and our kid was 2 years old at that point, and she was there. And anyway, it ended up being this beautiful event that also had the benefit of adding these protections for our family.
Well, Amy, I think this is a great place to take our break, and I have to forewarn you, as I do with all my guests, when we come back from the break, I'm going to be asking you for one fun fact about you that we don't know, and I know all of our listeners are on the edge of their seats waiting to hear this. So get your thinking cap on. You're listening to Healing Ties, featured on the Whole Care Network and UK Health Radio, the world's #1 talk health radio. We'll be right back. Hey, it's Christopher McClellan. You just might know me as the Bowtie Guy on Healing Ties 2.0. On Healing Ties, we visit with people from all over the globe who share their stories, because it's through story sharing where diversity meets the road to collaborate on a common cause. And if you'd like to share your story on Healing Ties, email me direct at thebowtieguy@healingties.com. We would love to share your story to your health, happiness, and prosperity. Coming up next week on Healing Ties.
Hi, I'm Ellen Pober-Ritberg. Join me next week when I talk with Chris about my book, Why is Grandma Naked? Caring for Your Aging Parent. And it's a humorous how-to book, and we're going to have a lot of laughs and hopefully a lot of insights that you find fun and helpful.
Well, welcome back, everybody. We are continuing our delightful conversation with my new friend, Amy Whalen from the National Center for Lesbian Rights in San Francisco and offices in Washington, D.C. And it's time for you to put you on the spot, Amy. It's time's up. I need to know a fun fact about you. I know one, but I'm not going to give it away until after you say, because it's a common thing that both of us want to do, but I want to know what your fun fact is.
Oh my gosh, I want to know the fun
Oh,
fact you already
it begins
know
with
about
an
me, but-
S.
Okay.
And it's across the pond. Spain.
Oh yes, that is a fun fact about me.
So you can't
Across
use that
the
one. I
pond.
was trying to set you up there, but now you can't use that one. You have to come up with something.
Since the Summer Olympics are coming up, I'll give this fun fact about me, which is that when I was 10 years old, I won in a contest a USA Olympic jacket.
Oh.
And when I was a little 10-year-old baby dyke, I wore this jacket. I think every single day in the summer of 1984 to everywhere I went. And so if there are ever any pictures of me during that summer, you will probably see that.
Well, I might have to do a Google search now, and see if I can find one of those photos.
Well, good luck with that from 1984, but
that's just a few years ago. Well, that's a nice fun fact to have that jacket. Where might that jacket be?
You know, I bet it does. I don't know. It might be in a box somewhere. I'm sure it's like yellowed and totally unwearable now, but I think it may still be around somewhere.
I'm testing my. I wonder if was the Olympics in Los Angeles in 1984?
The Summer Olympics. I don't know, but wasn't that the Mary Lou Retton Summer Olympics?
Yeah, she was
her.
She was fantastic. Goodness.
She was fantastic.
We're kind of aging ourselves here, but
now we're aging ourselves. But that's okay.
Not to digress here, but talk about aging myself. I was on with a couple. They're coworkers. They're in their 30s. And I don't know what we got to be talking about movies, and I said, "Oh, you got to see Priscilla, Queen of the Desert." And they both looked at me and like, "What? What is that movie all about?" And I thought, "Oh my God, I'm turning into my parents."
That's hilarious. I know. I always think that there's like a soundtrack and a group of movies and books that I wish was like part of the educational upbringing of all LGBTQ youth.
Right, and that's it reminds us why we tell the stories to remind folks. We keep the memory of Stonewall in our mind and in our hearts. And I think about Richard was 20 years older than me, and he was in New York during Stonewall. And he had vivid memories of that experience, and that's why we continue to do these podcasts and talk openly about those memories, because those folks are the ones who paved the way for us today.
Absolutely, they're the people who built the civil rights movement of the LGBT community, and it's hard sometimes because the history is so important, and of course you want people to know it, but you also have this deep down hope also that it is history, right, and that, the young people coming up will have very different experiences, and they won't, hopefully those experiences will be foreign to them. So I hold both of those things, that the knowledge and awareness of it is so important, so that there's an understanding of where we came from and our leaders and the people who built up our community, but with the hope that the people coming up behind us, won't even have anywhere near those, tragedies or experiences or certainly violence that our
I am a firm believer.
I mean, Stonewall was
it was a historical moment.
It was a historical moment, but it was a violent uprising against police officers who constantly harassed and arrested and, stigmatized and attacked the LGBTQ community
for just being gay.
It's important.
Just being gay.
For being gay or trans, and for gathering in these places, and it's really important.
I think this is just my personal opinion on this. I think in 25 years I'll probably be I'll either be long gone or 89, one of the two, but I really do think will be a non-issue. The issues will be different because those who are coming behind us look at this, see it differently, and the statistics prove that that's where this is all going. But we have to stay vigilant for those of us today, and that's why the work that you do is so important.
Yeah, I think I share that hope, but I also, it's scary right now what's happening with the backlash, the post-marriage equality backlash with all of these anti-trans legislative bills,
Right.
for instance, that are, pending across the country, just a slew of them. And hopefully, like prior years, most of them will fail. But, these attempts to criminalize medical care for transgender kids, to criminalize doctors who provide it, to keep trans kids out of sports. I mean, this is just the focus and shift of, targeting transgender kids of all people is like really scary to me. And again, I think, most of those efforts will fail, but some of them are already in place and being challenged in court. So I think this is not a time to rest. Certainly Pride Month is a time for celebration and a time for parties and, to gather with our loved ones and our friends. But, it's also a time for reflection and thought about who are the most marginalized people in our community and how can we all make sure that they are protected.
So, Amy, let all of our listeners know how they can learn more about you and your work and be in touch with all your terrific resources that are available.
Sure. Well, one big way is, of course, to go to our website, which is nclrights.org. And if people are having legal issues, they can also get in touch with our legal information helpline. They can use our toll-free number, which is 800-528-6257, or they can also email us at info@nclrights.org, or there's also an online form that folks can use that goes directly to our amazing helpline attorney, Ming Wong. So those are a couple of ways that folks can get in touch with us if they need to, which hopefully they won't.
Well, Amy, with the great work that you're doing and for the LGBT community and beyond, you are certainly someone who's creating healing ties. I can't thank you enough for visiting with you today, and I just know I have a new friend.
Thank you so much, Chris. Every time I talk to you, we have such a lovely conversation. So it has been a pleasure, and I really appreciate you inviting me onto your show.
My pleasure. I am delighted to know there are advocates like Amy Whalen who are on the forefront for equality. Please be sure to visit the National Center for Lesbian Rights website for additional information on all the great work Amy and the staff are accomplishing at nclrights.org. And thank you for joining us today for this episode of Healing Ties. And if you would like to be a guest and share your stories on Healing Ties, email me direct at thebowtieguy@healingties.com. We would love to share your story on Healing Ties. As you know, I'm your host and presenter, Christopher McClellan. I've created a life to love after caregiving ends by being with awesome people like you. Thanks for listening, and be sure to subscribe to Healing Ties wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. We'll see you for another episode of Healing Ties real soon. Take care. Bye for now.